Welcome to this video on Software Development Lifecycle. On the CISSP exam, without a doubt, you will see question about SDLC and all of the topic relating to it. So in this video, let's talk about SDLC. Now, in the simplest form, SDLC is just a lifecycle. It's a series of a phase that moves software from inspection to reproduction or from creation to recreation. So what we are looking at is to reproduce the same thing over, and that's why it's called life cycle. And the idea is to make the software product more mature as it progresses through the life cycle. Now, the software development life cycle is not really a thing. There's really no such thing as a software development life cycle. There's a lot of different ways to do this on the CISSP exam. What you are going to see is question about the system development lifecycle, the SDLC, and that is from the NIST Special Publication 864. Now, this document focuses on system, but in reality, it's all same thing. This document is also outdated. It's been withdrawn as in May 31st of 2019. There is a new document which I will cover, but you are still going to see question about the particular document. So it's important to understand each one of these phases. Let's start with number one, which is initiation. This is when we start everything within the development lifecycle. We are going to define and document the need and purpose of a new system or a new software product. Then we will move into development or acquisition. This is when we design and develop or acquire the new system or softwares. Then step 3 or phase 3 is implementation. This is where we are going to test, evaluate and deploy the new system or the new software into operations. And once it's deployed, we move into phase 4, which is operation and maintenance, also called O&M. This is when the system or the software product is performing its function and it's maintained over the course of operation. And finally, we get to the phase 5, which is disposal. This is when we are going to decommission the system or the software and make it out of operation. Now I'm going to dive deeper into each one of these phases as we move through the video. But this is the gist of SDLC from NIST. The newer version of this is the NIST Special Publication 800-160. This is the System Security Engineering Consideration for Multi-Disk Approach in Engineering of Trustworthy Secure System. It's a big one. Okay, they could have just stuck with SDLC. But at the end of the day, this is the new SDLC. On the exam, the question you are going to be related to the older model, and in reality, they are about the same process. They just change the way they refer to them. So if you the new processes to the old processes, you are going to see exactly how they map up. Where in the old process is initiation, they really just concept the new processes, same exact thing. And then you have development and acquisition. We have development in the new processes. Then in the implementation and assessment phase, you have the production where we are actually implementing, and the utilization is the deployment. That's when we are going to move it, roll it out into production or operations. And then we have O&M. And then here we have support, which is basically the same thing. And then we have disposal, and go figure, we have retirement. The process really has not changed that much because in reality, it really can't. From inspection to destruction, it's pretty much the same process. They are just calling it different things. Let's talk through each one of these steps so that you are ready for any exam on the exam. Starting with the concept or the initiation phase, we are going to define and analyze the requirement and organizational objectives. There's a reason we are getting the software, or there is a reason we are building a software. So we want to define the reason and the requirements of what it expected to do. We also want to make sure we clearly understand any privacy or any data protection needs. This is critical as part of this stage because we know what the function is and what we hope to achieve with it. We should always understand that there are going to be some privacy concern or there's some data protection needs, and we need to identify those upfront. We also want to understand the development and acquisition requirements because we know what we want and we know the privacy and data protection needs. Are we going to build this, or are we going to buy it, or are we going to acquire it from someone? And that's how we define those specific requirements. So in the phase, we start our planning. We understand what the new software or the new system is going to do. We also conduct a privacy impact assessment to understand the privacy needs, and then we want to focus on, are we going to build it or are we going to buy it? So in the NIST special publication 864, this is exactly how they break it all down. Again, you have the initiation here, you have the categorize, which is you are going to do your privacy impact assessment here, and then you are going to assess the business impact. These are the goals, the objectives, what going to happen, and then we want to make sure that we are building secure system development into the process, and that's all going to stem from the privacy impact assessment and also the data protection needs as well. And then we will move on to the next phase once we have all of those output created. So the next phase is development and acquisition. So development and acquisition is all about understanding the risk and the privacy assessment. So we have done the initial. Now that we know we are either going to develop or acquire the product, now we need to understand the risk involved in both of those. So as part of the initiation, we have done the initial risk and impact, but now we need to clearly understand, because we are getting a third-party product, we are going to acquire it. We want to know the risk associated with that piece, and we also want to determine any initial requirement for security and privacy controls, because we now know that we are going to develop this software. Now we can focus on the controls that are going to build into that software or the system. Same thing with the acquisition. If we are going to get a COTS product, commercial off the shelf, and we are going to buy it from someone, now we can look at what the privacy concern and also the security control needed for that particular application. And we also want to create or update any security documents to reflect the change in system security and architecture design. What ends up happening is, as you move through the life cycle, things are going to change. They just change. So when they change, we want to make sure that we are keeping our documentation up to date. So again, when you look at the NIST 864, this is how they lay out the development and acquisition. So once we understand the initial risk, we want to perform an impact assessment or a risk analysis, and that's where we get our risk assessment report as an output. Again, here your security controls, also here your security architecture design right here, and then we are engineering all the controls into the design itself. Then we develop or update any documentation. Then once we are satisfied with all of that, we can move into the implementation and assessment phase. So now once we move here, this is where we are going to receive stakeholder approval for the development or for the deployment or the rollout of the software application or the system components, whatever we are developing. We also want to securely and safely deploy that new feature to the operation or production to make sure that we don't impact business operations. And then once it is deployed, we want to conduct a security assessment or a security audit for compliance purpose. So once it's deployed, we want to make sure it's being deployed. with the proper controls, that everything been implemented as we expected. And there might also be some compliance requirement to perform some kind of assessment or audit to make sure that we maintain compliance with any standing governance. So again, here's NIST 864, here is the phase 3. So again, we have our CNA plan, which is the certification accreditation plan, and that may or may not relate to your depending on the industry. But really what we are looking at here is integrating security into environment. So now we are deploying everything into the environment and integrating it into the system. Here is where we do our assessment, and then here where we again update some documentation and ask for authorization to begin operating this product in a production or operation. And at that point, that's when we make our move to operation and maintenance. So now moving into phase 4, which is operation and maintenance. This is where the software or the system is providing all of the functionalities that's been designed. So we are going to apply proper configuration management and manage control from this point forward. In reality, we want to track this as early as possible, but this is when the product is actually in operation and it can affect the business. So proper change control is very important at this particular point. And we also want to continuously monitor our security controls, because we planned everything out in a meeting or in a broad room or something like that. This is now where we get to understand, are the security controls truly effective, or we do need to do something different. And of course, as threats and vulnerability change, we also need to change our security controls as well. So again, here is an example from NIST 864. This phase here is pretty straightforward. We have our operational readiness. Now we can put it into production and operation, and then again we are going to perform our configuration management and change control. Everything is going to go through the CCB from this point forward. No unauthorized change shall be introduced, those kind of things. And then of course we want to continuously monitor all of our security controls and make sure that it is providing adequate protection. And then at some point that product will become end of life or end of service, and we want to dispose of that product. So that last phase is when we remove it from operation to all production. One of the most important part of this, that we sanitize or we declassify the software and or the data that is on board that's being maintained by the application. So we want to remove any of the sensitive information within the data that processed by the application before we pull it out from operation. We also want to apply configuration management and change control and continuously monitor security controls as we remove it from operational environment. Why is this important? Because we are making a change to the software baseline. So we want to make sure that it is accounted for in all of our CM documentation. We want to follow the request, change and release control processes to make sure that we properly do this. And we also want to continuously monitor to make sure that we did not regress the system, that we did not introduce more threats or more risks to the system. Again, from NIST 864, here's the example of disposal phase, where we move in, we have our disposal plan or our transition plan, whatever we are doing. And we also want to make sure that we have information preservation, that we properly sanitizing or declassifying as needed. We make sure that we have those records, because if it is controlled data of any kind, we want to make sure that we have those for an audit, and then we dispose of any hardware or software as part of the system, and then we close that product down. And at this point it is end of life. So the bottom line is here to know the SDLC process, know each one of the steps and understand what happened during each step within that process.